Story 1. The Manor. All these experiences occurred in my grandmother's house, which is an old manor house. Although the house isn't very big, it's been around for 200 years. All of my dad's family has lived there, and my grandmother lives there now, alone. There have been many different events happen in the house. Things such as disembodied footsteps, dogs barking at something unseen, the shower being turned on and then off, minor things. One time my uncle fell asleep in the kitchen at night. The door he was sleeping next to was flung open, waking him, even though there was no draft and it was a windless night. The same uncle also had an experience as a young child. When he was younger, he would hear footsteps outside his window late at night, as though someone was walking hurriedly over the gravel. At the same time, he would see two big black dogs sitting by his bed. One time my grandmother was walking upstairs with some laundry. She dropped something, bent down to pick it up. As she was retrieving it, she saw a pair of shoes on the step in front of her. They were as real as humans. She looked up, saw a long skirt, and the start of a shirt, and then the figure disappeared. My grandmother swears to this day that that is a true story, and says, although she didn't feel threatened, she certainly wonders who this one was and why she was in this house. There was no one else home at the time. The set of stairs also curved, so if someone had been walking down them, you would have seen them. Most recently, my sister and I were in the corridor opposite the dining room. The dining room is locked and not in use. There was a key on the outside of the door. We were standing there talking when the key started moving, as if someone was trying to get out from the inside. We thought that maybe someone was in there at first, but then we remembered that the key had been moving from our side. Most recently, we were sitting outside on the lawn whilst my dad and uncle were playing badminton on the court behind us. The garden is raised almost on a hilltop, with steps leading up to, so the grass we were sitting on was in line with the upstairs bedroom window. We are facing the window, talking, looking in at my grandmother's two dogs, who could be seen sitting on her bed. My grandmother had gone out shopping and had left her dogs shut into the bedroom. First, we saw one dog start barking urgently at something in the far corner, just out of our sight. This continued, and then the other dog jumped up to the bed again and started barking directly at us. We thought this was strange, but what happened next couldn't be explained. A white mist, almost in the form of a hand, passed over the dog's head, as if it was stroking her. She then stopped barking. We both looked at each other in horror, knowing that we had both seen the same thing. I honestly can't think of another explanation for the hand that we saw. I still feel scared to go into the house to this day. Story 2. On the farm. We lived on a small farm with a huge backyard, and behind the fence an even larger pasture. I was 11 when we lived there, and we, the kids, would always explore the backyard, especially at night. We'd play hide and seek all of the time. One night, in the big backyard, I was all alone, looking out at the pasture, when suddenly I felt as though I was being watched. I turned my head to look at the house, and I saw a transparent man looking at me. He disappeared a few seconds later. My uncle had died when I was 4 years old, so I assumed that it was him watching over me, and I ventured into the house and went to sleep. A few months went by with no strange happenings. I went over to a friend's house one night to spend the night with her. We were having a slumber party and ended up sleeping in the living room. She woke up scared, woke me up. It was about 3 a.m. She had woke up to go to the bathroom when she felt something that made her hair stand on end, and then saw a tall figure of a man, all shadowy and dark, with a pressed suit. He had no hands and no feet, and he had a burlap bag over his head. I thought she was kidding around and trying to scare me, so I got up and ventured in the direction where she was pointing, when I felt this strange sensation, and just like magic, there he was, where she said he would be. I ran back and told her that I too had seen him. She ran into her parents' room, got them out of bed. Naturally, they told us there was no such thing. Told us to go back to sleep. We lay in the living room for a long time, just watching as this thing paced back and forth, and we waited for dawn so we could finally get some sleep. At about 5 in the morning, our visitor disappeared, and we fell sound asleep. It seems that this ghost visited us nightly at the same time for almost 2 years, just pacing the halls, turning things on and off, changing channels and radio stations, just little things to annoy us. One of the scariest nights I can remember was one at my house. We were sitting on the bed, eating ice cream, when we both got that spooky feeling and fell silent. We smelled something burning for about a second, and then we heard the most guttural, scary howl that I have ever heard in my life. We threw our bowls and we ran into the living room, where we felt the need to spill the beans to my parents. Of course, they told us that we were crazy and that it was just our imaginations. A few months later, I was still insisting that there was something evil in our house. They kept telling me that it was just my imagination, and asked if I needed counseling or something. Eventually, my parents decided that maybe moving would help shake this from me. We moved 65 miles away to another town, to another farmhouse that was even older than the last one. The same thing happened here, only instead of pacing back and forth, this figure would lean over my bedside, floating, making noises like it wanted to say something. It was a nightly ordeal for a few months. One night, there was so much paranormal activity going on in my room that my younger brother was awakened by the sounds, and he came in to investigate, only to turn white, start screaming and crying, and run out of the room. To this day, he will not tell me what he saw. Eventually, I grew up. I joined the military, and still these creatures follow me. No matter where I've been stationed, they have been there. At some point it did stop though, and I had a couple years of no experience. But just the other night, my boyfriend woke up and said that he felt like he'd been choked. He even had some bruises on him. I woke up a couple times to hearing heavy breathing. That wasn't him, wasn't any of the animals. So I think my nightly visitors are back. Story 3. Dark Shadows and Disembodied Voices. When I was young, my grandmother owned a very old, rustic country summer house in a small village about 3 hours away from a large city where I grew up. There was nothing particularly threatening about the outside of her house. To a casual onlooker, it just looked like a very quaint old house. Much like the majority of the houses during summer break from school, my parents would send me there since my grandmother took her vacations there, far away from the busy where we all lived. Though I missed my parents a lot and didn't get along well with my grandmother, I still, for the most part, enjoyed a large garden full of old apple trees, a berry orchard, and a very large vegetable garden. The inside of the house was very different feel. First of all, it was definitely very old, somewhat musty, because it went unused for a very large portion. In one of the bedrooms, where the wallpaper was peeled, you could see several layers of different colored wallpaper, which makes me think that the house was owned by many different people before my grandmother, although she had owned it for many, many years. Though it had a sink, it did not have a toilet or a shower. Instead, there was an outhouse outside and an outside shower for summer use. There was one room in the house that had been added sometime after the original house was built. It was a slightly newer open space with many windows, painted in a pleasant pastel color. It was located at the very back of the house. For some reason, my grandmother insisted that particular room is where I would stay. If you were to simply look at it, you would find absolutely nothing threatening about this room. However, for some reason, I was terrified of staying there. My parents always remarked that unlike other children, I was scared of nothing. I always slept with the lights off. I never had any incidents where I was scared to be alone. I never had any other childlike fears, such as monsters in the closet or under my bed. So my parents found it very highly unusual that I would beg my grandmother to let me sleep in the bedroom in the main part of the house. But she always told me I was being silly and that there was nothing wrong with that room. Yet at night, with the lights off, I couldn't help but hear knocking and what sounded like footsteps after my grandmother had gone to bed. Having never been scared of anything, I'd pull the blanket up almost all the way over my. except for my eyes. I would see very faint, dark shadows moving along. I tried so hard to convince myself that I was just imagining things, but the extreme uneasy feeling never let up. I felt like something in the room could physically hurt me if it chose to. I told my parents, and I kept asking my grandmother about the room, but my questions were sidestepped, and I was always told that I was just imagining things. Maybe it was because the room was sort of isolated from the rest of the house, and I was nervous. And of course, I got the usual explanation of, it's just a house settling. On a few occasions, when I'd be allowed to sleep in a bedroom in the main part of the house, I felt a lot more at ease. I'd be able to fall asleep much easier. In the other room, the uneasy feeling would keep me up for hours, which was highly unusual for me, and I never had trouble sleeping anywhere else. Yet, though significantly weaker, the effects of the negative energy from that room permeated the entire house. To wash up before bed, you would heat water in the kitchen, put it in a basin. On numerous occasions, I'd be washing my face or giving myself a sponge bath, since the only shower was outside. I had very strong feelings and watched to the point where I would do what I needed to do as fast as possible, turn to look behind me, expecting to find someone. On one particular occasion, I remember it very clearly. It was broad daylight. My grandmother had went to the local market to buy food, leaving me at the house by myself. I was about to go outside to the garden when I heard a very loud female voice, very clearly calling my name from the living room. Utterly confused, I went to investigate. My grandmother was still out. I confirmed I was alone. And then I heard the same voice urgently from another room. I was really freaked out and almost ran out of the house, but I made myself go and investigate one more time. I saw no one. When my grandmother got back from the market, I told her. She told me that many people have imagined things, especially someone calling their name, when they're home by themselves. Even then, I thought it was an odd explanation, since I'd never had that occurrence before. And actually, I've never had an occurrence like that since then. Sadly, since I was still a child, I never found out the history before my grandmother finally sold it, but was too old to maintain it. I honestly don't envy whoever owns it. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the stories. If you did, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. I really do appreciate it. Bye.